Danny Kofke joins me now. How are you, Danny?
Hey, Doc, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's good to be in here in the new year. You have a book out, How to Survive on a Teacher's Salary, and I find this particularly interesting because I think in the new year, this is going to be a major issue. We know education is something that has been talked about a lot during the fall and over last summer, but now there's a little twist on it. It comes down to, are those teachers making too much? Is the union responsible for this? So that's the reason I wanted to talk to you about what teachers make.
All right, that's a very interesting question. Obviously, I'm a little biased, being a classroom teacher, but I think the way we look at the way teachers are paid, that's the problem. It's right now it's based on how many years you have in the classroom. So let's just say you are a third-year teacher. You have the most dynamic lesson plans. Your kids are growing. You're, leaps and bounds, 2 grade level growth, doing a great job. Yet someone down the hall from you, say is a 20-year veteran, they don't really teach that well. Their students aren't learning nearly as much as your students are. They still get paid at, it's probably going to be a couple of $5,000-$6,000 more than you are because of the way the salary schedule is set up. And that's where my problem is. And I know there has been talk in the administration about working the way teachers are paid, going to more of a merit-based pay system. And I am for that because I've seen in my experience, it was about 10 years ago when I was teaching kindergarten, there was a teacher down the hall from me. I would walk by her classroom during my break, and every afternoon there would be a movie on, and her students would be watching videos. Yeah. And at that time I thought, you know what, I could go back to my kindergarten class, and they could all learn how to read. I could do the greatest things with them, and no matter what I do, this teacher down the hall who watches videos every afternoon will get paid more than me. And in our society, in a capitalistic country, that's usually not the way it works. I think hard work and results are rewarded rather than just based on going in and punching the time clock and doing whatever you want. And unfortunately, in education, it seems like it is that way right now, and I think that's why a lot of our test scores are down. There's a lot of teachers that quit the profession, good ones, because they get into it and they see that and they get frustrated and then they go move on.
I think most Americans would agree with that. I think most people would be for some sort of merit-based pay. Hey, if you're doing a good job, reward it. And if you're not, then don't. But how do you determine merit? Would it be based just on the test scores of the kids, what they've learned? What standard do you use to measure that?
Well, I think that you can't just base it on test scores. I think that could play a role in it, but when you just do a blind, because sometimes that's like comparing apples to oranges, because if you teach in a lower economic school compared to someone in a higher economic school, the test scores are probably going to be better for someone whose students have parental support and those types of things. But I think it can play a role in it. And if you are going to base it on test scores, here's what I say. That first week of school, second week of school, whatever, the beginning of the year, give that test that you usually give at the end of the year, and then you give it in August or September, whenever you start, and then when it gets to be April and May, you give that same test again, and then you can see the percentage growth of your students, and then you will know how effective of a job you're doing. Now, granted, there's going to be some, it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all because there are some students that miss 40, 50 days of school, and, you have to take that into play. But I think if we are going to solely base teachers on test scores, then we need to do a different job because the way it is right now, those test scores are publicized in the local media, and, usually, and that's the way teachers are judged right now. And unfortunately, you have a teacher, and this is the way it works, if you're usually a pretty dynamic, good teacher, a lot of times you will get those struggling students because you need to make a certain grade on those test scores. Now, let's just say the test scores are based 1 through 5, 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest, 3 passing. So if you have a classroom full of students that are already hitting a level 3 on that test, well, you know what? You might put them with a teacher who might not be as good the next year because, they're already at that level 3. They're not going to bring our test scores down. They're okay. They're passing. But then you have this dynamic teacher who does a great job. Well, a lot of times they're going to get hit with the level 1 and level 2 students because they know they do such a great job teaching. They have to raise those test scores up to make the school look good. And then that creates burnout, and it just is a whole array of problems. So I think if it was revamped, if we're just going to look at test scores, I think that's a starting point.
Danny Kofke has the book, How to Survive on a Teacher's Salary. The problem is, I don't know if you could effectively measure how well a teacher's doing. There are so many variables. First of all, like you said, if you measure a kid at the beginning of the school year and then incrementally throughout the school year at the end and say, wow, that teacher's doing good because he grew so much. You've got a lot of outside influences. What's going on in the community? What's going on at home? Are his parents working with him? Whether or not the kid has the ability to learn as easily as another student. So that's really tricky for me.
Definitely. Oh, there are. I mean, and it's not, like I said, I mean, that cannot be the only measure just based on test scores because there are so many variables that go into that. But I think if you're going to use it, I think that would be a way to go rather than just base it solely on the test scores at the end of the year. I mean, there maybe needs to be a group of very highly qualified educators who maybe have gotten out of the profession that go around to different schools and do classroom observations and walk in and see what's going on in the classroom. It would, you know, there's going to have to be a lot of meeting of the minds to figure out the correct formula, but I think there's going to be a lot of things that have to take place to measure the success and the quality of a teacher.
I think a lot of it should be the administrators. The administrators have to, you know, set some of the standards, like we've said, whether it's test scores, growth of the students, stuff like that to measure them. But then also they have to decide, hey, listen, I see Pete putting in a lot of extra hours. I see what he does. I see Janet, she's not putting in the time, you know, stuff like that. Maybe you could, when it comes to monitoring classes, maybe you could put a camera in every class. Would that frustrate you as a teacher, knowing that that was on and randomly your supervisor may be watching, maybe a parent? Would that intimidate you or be bad for the students?
It wouldn't intimidate me, not at all. You know, I think that would be an okay thing. The hard thing with just basing it on administration is, unfortunately, there are some bad administrators out there, and that's where, if it was solely based on that person's point of view, it would be tough. I live outside of Atlanta, and the Atlanta public schools right now have taken a huge black eye. The superintendent supposedly passed down, I guess, judgment and passed down to teachers and administrators to change test scores. And there was some erasure marks on test scores. I mean, it's this huge scandal, and she's actually going to be out of the job by June. So it's just hard when you base it just on an administrator, too. There's other variables that take an effect. I think that could be part of the formula, but I don't think it could be the end-all, be-all, because, unfortunately, we do have some administrators who you don't like to think that would happen, but it does happen where test scores are changed and teachers are, you know, they're getting better, I guess, evaluations than really what they're worth to make the school look better.
Do you think teachers are underpaid? And I know you said you're biased. I want to talk about this for a second. Generally speaking, and there are wide differences depending upon areas you go, wealthier areas, poor areas, state to state. But generally speaking, are teachers well paid or underpaid?
I think this is a hard question because of, like you said, the difference from state to state. But I think overall we are underpaid. If you look, there was actually a report done by payscale.com. It came out last June that it said that elementary education is the second lowest paying four-year college degree. They did this study. So I think that we are, and I'll tell you right now, I'm an hour outside of Atlanta. This is my 11th year teaching, and I make a little above $41,000 a year. So right now it's hard to complain because I know there are a lot of people struggling, a lot of people are hurting financially, but I think most would agree that $41,000 a year is not a large salary. The problem is, and I think the public would buy into more of to raise the teacher pay if we got rid of some of the bad apples in the classroom. And I think that's where the problem is. We hear these horror stories of teachers being protected by the union that are not good teachers. They're not effective teachers. So if your child has an ineffective teacher who doesn't do much, is pretty much similar to the teacher that I experienced that watched videos every afternoon, your perception of teachers and of education is probably not going to be that high. Whereas if we had a bunch of dynamic teachers, if we changed the formula and the pay, you could earn more bonuses, you could, you know, earn a higher salary, which I think would draw more qualified, or you'd have a higher quality of teachers, I believe, then I think the outside public would not have a problem. If you sent your kid to school and then, you know, say their kindergarten, first grade year, they didn't know how to write their name entering, and by the end of first grade they're reading Harry Potter books, you probably would say, gosh, those teachers did an awesome job. I have no problem with them getting paid. But then if your child, for the first 2 years of their educational life, have horrible teachers that don't do much, well, then you're probably not going to think too highly of education. And then those are the people that say, well, they have summers off, they do this, they have that, and then there's the argument. So I think if we got rid of some of the bad apples, that I think it's a natural progression that the pay would increase.
How much time do you get off? Because we have the perception you get 3 months off a year. How much time do you get off?
Well, I mean, we do have Christmas break off, so that's 2 weeks. We do have summer, and summer's getting shorter. Here in Georgia, now it's just June and July. We go back in August. So, I mean, it is 2 months. I actually teach summer school. So, personally, myself, I have just the month of July off since I do summer school in June. But it is, I guess, if you round it out throughout the year, it's about 3 months off.
Okay. Well, I mean, the reason I ask that, especially when it comes to the summer, a lot of teachers will take a second job over the summer, make a couple of extra dollars, and that would reflect your salary being a little bit lower. I think most people agree that teachers should be paid. Go ahead and pay them, especially if they're a good teacher. I would think on average, if the average salary in America is high 30s for somebody, I would think if teachers are doing well, I would have no problem with them making $10,000, $15,000 a year more than that. And then if they're doing really well and you base it on bonuses and hitting certain benchmarks in that as far as achievement of the kids, I'm fine with that.
Right, and I think most people would hold the same views that you do. They would not have a problem if the teacher is deserving of it. Actually, Michelle Rhee, who was the D.C. Chancellor of Schools, she proposed, it was, last year before, that she proposed that teachers in the D.C. area could make up to $140,000 a year if they were effective, but they would have to give up tenure, and the unions fought against that and said, no, we're not doing that.
Well, and quite frankly, they'll probably end up there anyways with the tenure, so it's not in their best interest to give anything up. I mean, you have people. It's really sad, and I'm talking with Danny Kofke, the book How to Survive on a Teacher's Salary. That's a problem, Danny, is when it comes to the unions represent the union and the teachers. It's not about education, but the marketing they use is really disingenuous and pretty insidious when what about the children? And they use that in order to get the teachers more money and protect them, as we've said, instead of saying, let's get in there and fight for truly education.
Definitely. I mean, the union is there to protect its members who pay their dues. So that is why. But the problem, I think unions, they started off, it was a good thing because there are some protections that we need, and they fight for our salaries and benefits and those types of things, and I think that's great. But now it's like the pendulum has swung to where they are protecting bad teachers. And then the public, you hear that, and then it just gives our whole profession a black eye. When you just hear, and there's not many. I mean, most teachers are good teachers. They're qualified. They do a great job and, really want to make the world a better place. But like in any job or any career, there are a few bad apples. But now those are the ones that are publicized. You hear those horrible stories, and then the whole public has this, a bad conception of unions and of the teaching profession, and then I just think that brings us all down.
I think you have a really reasonable outlook on it, and hopefully there'll be more and more people that are that reasonable in the coming years, and we can turn this around, because that is going to be the issue with education, unions and funding, as we see levies pop up and funding dry up. It's Danny Kofke, How to Survive on a Teacher's Salary. I'm going to put a link to your book on my blog at 700WLW.com.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me on, Doc.
Thank you so much. Happy New Year. That's what we need, reasonable people that understand. We got to get a hold of this thing. We've got to truly look at it from the ground up and say, how are we going to fund this? Let's go ahead and base it on merit. Let's put the responsibility down on the educator and say, if you do well, fine, make a good buck. Let's be reasonable about it. It's going to be the battle with education in the coming years. Doc Thompson, 700 WL.